Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and over the past couple of days, we've been talking about the different categories that we can put video games into. And I've used some very subjective terms when making those videos. Some of those terms being fluff, filler, shovelware, grails. And those are just some of the terms that we often use when trying to identify what category a particular type of game will fall into. And I've gotten a wide range of feedback on that. Some folks who have agreed, some folks who have disagreed, some folks who feel like a game is a game is a game, right? Meaning that there really should be no buckets that a video game falls into. I guess all video games are alike in that someone will find the game fun and someone will want the game to play. And I think, in a very broad sense, this is somewhat true. I think every video game, regardless of how obscure, regardless of how old, will have at least one person who wants to play it. Every game. And whether that person is someone older, someone younger, a child, someone who's into gaming, a collector, a casual game player, regardless of who they are, every video game at some point or another should find a home or will find someone who enjoys playing it. However, there's an application that I use, and I think many who collect video games and have any size catalog, right? It doesn't matter if you have 10 games or 5 games. There is an app that's out there, and it's called GameEye. And GameEye is an app that was created for collectors to be able to catalog the video games that they have in their collection. And it's very helpful depending on how large your collection is, because if you're out game hunting and you see a game that you may be interested in, if your collection is really large, you may or may not know, or you may not be able to remember whether or not you actually own a particular game. So being able to pull out your catalog and search via GameEye is definitely something that's helpful. And I think a lot of folks who use that tool will find it helpful. But GameEye does have some criteria that it uses to value games. One of those criteria is a Metacritic score, right? And if you open up GameEye, you'll see where some games have this Metacritic score, which ranges, from 0 to basically 100. I don't know if I've ever seen a game get a 100% Metacritic score. I've definitely seen some games get scores into the 90s. But the Metacritic score is an indicator, is meant to be a general indicator of how good the game is. And good is an extremely subjective term, right? Because there are so many ways that you can qualify a game as being good. A game could have good music, but bad graphics. Great graphics, but horrible voice acting. Amazing voice acting, but the controls suck. So this whole topic, I'm just put a big disclaimer, right? This whole topic is extremely subjective, which is why I love talking about it, because everyone is going to have a different opinion based on their point of view, their history with playing video games, their stance on collecting and video game values. And that's why it makes for such a great topic, because there's so many different views on it. But I think what GameEye tries to do is GameEye tries to make the status of a game, they try to objectively rank games as best as possible. And one of the best ways that they can do that is through the Metacritic score. Now, the cool part, or the funny part about GameEye, ironically enough, is that there will be some games that have a ridiculously high Metacritic score, meaning that these games are beloved by many. Everyone who's played the game has enjoyed it for the most part, and it's generally considered a good game. And then you have games with very low Metacritic scores. But the funny part is that usually, or not usually, but a lot of times, I should say, there will be a big difference between the price or value of a game, because that's one of the things that GameEye does, is that it actually allows you to see what the general price or value of a game is. And a lot of times you'll see where some of the most expensive games have extremely low Metacritic scores, and vice versa, right? You'll see where games that have really high Metacritic scores are extremely cheap. And so I think that that just kind of goes to show that there really is no correlation between a game being good, a game being good, and a game being expensive, right? Price doesn't always reflect how good a game is. Um, and a lot of times, some of the best games are some of the cheapest games. I had someone comment on one of my videos, basically stating how, um, filler, I guess what I would call filler, isn't really filler, because, a lot of the games are great titles, games that are benchmarks for a genre, games that have large followings, and all of this is true. But if we think about filler, then what is filler? What would you consider filler? What would you consider a grail? What would you consider shovelware? This is the interesting part, because the subjective nature of video games, and by subjective, I mean we all have different tastes. We all have different things that we're into. Some people get motion sickness when they play first-person shooters. So while many would consider Gears of War or Modern Warfare or Halo to be a grail, right? For a person who, or even GoldenEye, right? For a person who gets motion sickness playing for a first-person shooter, those games might be at the bottom of their list. They might give those games a Metacritic score of 35, because the nature of the thing is subjective, right? So I guess my question to the Y2K community is there a definitive way to define what is filler versus what is top tier or a grail or a classic? How do we define games, and how do we delineate the difference? Or is it to where a game is a game is a game? There's no distinction, there's no difference. All games are created and played equally. No game should be ranked higher than the other. I'm interested to know your thoughts. Now, despite what we all might say, we know what the reality is. The reality is that there is a difference. The reality is that there are games valued higher than others. The reality is that there are games that cost more than others. And that's because just the market sets the price. The market sets the value. So despite what one or two people might think, regardless of what you think, regardless of what I think, the market is always going to have the last say. And by market, I mean anywhere you go to buy a game, whether it be online, eBay, Mercari, GameStop, your local retro game store, shoot, even the yard sales, even Goodwill, even the Salvation Army and thrift stores are now allowing the market to speak. And the market is the general masses, right? The general public. So despite what we know to be true, I'm interested to know what the community thinks. Are all games created equal? Is there a difference? Are there games that fall into the class of being filler titles? And if so, what are those games, and what makes those games filler? Is it the quantity in which the amount of games that the quantity of production? Is it the price of the game? Is it the quality of the game? Is it the genre of the game? What determines this? I'm really interested to know what you all think. So Y2K Collector, let's continue the conversation. I'll catch you in the next video.